Hello and welcome. In this segment, we will be covering the concepts of files and directories in a computer's file system, demonstrating the file managers in Windows, macOS, and Linux, and describing the location of files and directories in the file system. A file is a container for data or related information. It can contain plain text that we can easily read, or it can contain other binary data. Files that contain non-text binary data could be images, music, videos, or even runnable programs. Typically, they store data to be used with a specific program, like a Word or an Excel file. Editing them with a different program can have undesirable results. Here I have 3 files. Let's see what happens when I try to edit them. The first file is a basic text file, and I'm going to open it in a text editor. Here, we can clearly read what's inside the file. Here we have an image file. Let's try to view the contents of the file. We see here not easily recognizable text, but instead non-text binary information that is being displayed as hexadecimal characters. Let's see what happens when we try to change some of the contents. We see here that there is a change in the image. Now let's try editing an Excel spreadsheet. Here we see a very simple spreadsheet. Again, when we open it in a text editor, we see the binary information represented as hexadecimal characters. Let's try to make a change. Essentially, what we're doing is corrupting the data inside the file. What effect does this have? Unfortunately, it has corrupted the data to such an extent that we cannot recover the information. A file extension is a suffix at the end of a file name. In the example here, assignment.docx, it's the dot, doc, and x that forms the file extension. File extensions describe the file type or kind of data contained in the file, and it's used by the operating system to determine what program is meant to open that file. Here are some common file extensions. On the left-hand side, we see file extensions associated with documents. The top 3 represent files for Microsoft Office. The bottom 3 represent files for OpenOffice, an Office Suite application that is free to use. In the next column, we have text-based files. These files can be opened up by a variety of programs, and the contents can be read very easily. Next, we have images, such as GIFs, JPEGs, PNGs, as well as other images. And in the rightmost column, we have media files, such as audio and video files. macOS also uses creator codes. These are codes inside the file that help determine what program to start when a file is double-clicked. They often serve the same purpose as file extensions, but they don't appear in the file name. In a file system, directories can contain files and/or other directories. They can also be empty. In the operating system, they are often depicted graphically as a file folder. The terms directory and folder are often used interchangeably, but directory represents the file system concept, while folder is the graphical representation in the operating system itself. A directory tree is a logical, tree diagram view of a file system. It involves 4 important concepts. The root directory is at the highest level in the file system. A subdirectory is contained within another directory. A parent directory contains the subdirectory being referenced. By definition, the root directory has no parent. And the working directory is the location on the file system that you are currently working in or viewing. Here, we see a directory tree representing a file system in Windows. At the root, we see the drive letter, followed by a colon and a backslash. Subdirectories within the root include program files, users, and Windows. Let's focus on the users directory. It has a subdirectory called Jane, which contains all of Jane's files. Jane has organized her files into two subdirectories, Docs for documents and Pics for images. Inside the Docs subdirectory, we see that she has two files, Assignment 3 and Letter. It also contains a subdirectory called Labs. In the Pics directory, Jane has organized her files into two subdirectories. Here we see an example directory tree from the Linux operating system. At the root, we have a single character, the /, not a drive letter like with Windows. Again, we can see that Jane has further organized her files into subdirectories. An operating system has many components. The core of the OS is called the kernel. You don't interact with it directly. Instead, you use other programs to issue commands to the kernel. File managers are programs that facilitate navigating and managing the file system. They are often part of the graphical user interface, or GUI. Let's first start by looking at the Windows file manager, called Explorer. Here we are in Windows 10. We can open up the Explorer in one of two ways. We can either click on the icon at the bottom here, if it's pinned to the taskbar, or we can double-click this PC if it's available. Here we have a listing of all the drives in the system. I'm going to double-click or open the local disk which stores the operating system. Here, we see various subdirectories in the root of the file system. Let's take a look at users. And Stephen C. Here we have a listing of all my files. They're broken down into categories. I can double-click on documents to see the documents that I have. But I can also navigate the directory tree here on the left. I can navigate into a subdirectory, and I can go from a subdirectory to the parent directory in many ways. I can either go back to the previous location, I can go up directly to the parent directory, or I can access the contents of the parent directory at the top here. If I'm in a subdirectory, I can go up, down, and even over to another branch of the directory tree using the listing at the top here. Here, I see a list of pictures, selfie, yeah right, I wish, and a reunion. Previously, we mentioned file extensions. Here, by default, Windows hides the file extensions of known files. But let's view them. Here, I want to change the options so that they're always visible. Now, we can see the file extensions. If we want to learn more about a file or directory, we can right-click it and click Properties. Here we see its location, its size, and the date it was created, modified, and accessed. We can also specify permissions to read, write, or access the file. And we can see other details about the file. Sometimes backups are automatically created. They would appear here. Here we have macOS version 10.11 El Capitan. The file manager in macOS is called Finder. It's usually open by default, or sometimes it can be opened from the dock. By default, it shows all your files. To view your home directory, go to the Go menu and select Home. Here you can see your files divided into folders: Documents and Pictures. Again, you can navigate using the back and forward buttons. In addition, some favorites are located on the left-hand side. Alternatively, you can right-click or control-click the title. You can navigate up and down the directory tree. To view information about a file or directory, control-click or right-click one of the icons. Selecting Get Info will reveal more information about that item. Here, we can see the type of item it is, either a file or a folder, the size, where it's located, and its time of creation and modification. At the bottom, we have information about sharing and permissions. Linux is a very customizable and freely distributed operating system. Many different GUIs and file managers can be used with the kernel. This distribution of Linux is called Ubuntu, and the file manager is called PCManFM. Sometimes the file manager can be started directly from the desktop. Other times it's available through the application menu. By default, it opens up in the user's home directory, the directory where the user stores all of his or her own files. Let's start by navigating up the directory tree to the root. We can see the current path in the title bar. We know we're at the root because a path is simply a /. Now, let's navigate to Home, Stephen C, and Documents. Just as before, we have 2 files and 1 subdirectory. Again, we can navigate backwards and forwards. But in this version, we can't jump directly to a different branch of the directory tree. We first have to go through the parent and to another directory. The way in which we can describe the location of a file or directory can be broken down into 2 categories. An absolute path describes the location from the root of the file system to the file or directory. A relative path describes the location from the working directory to the file or directory. Suppose I wanted to give directions to Professor Mackenzie's office. Now I could simply say that Professor Mackenzie's office is down the hall from me. That would be analogous to a relative path, as I'm describing it relative to my current location. I'm currently in my office, so that's true. But what if I were to move? If I move to a different building, or if you are listening at home or on the bus, the description down the hall is no longer relevant or accurate. That's the problem with a relative path. It's only accurate relative to the current working directory. If the working directory changes, the relative path is no longer valid. If I wanted to describe the location of Professor Mackenzie's office in absolute terms, I could say that it is room 3045 in the Lassonde building, on the York University campus, in Toronto, Ontario, in Canada, and on Earth. That would be accurate regardless of where you are. Here are some file path examples. On the right, we have a subset of a directory tree from the Windows operating system. At the root, we have the drive letter, followed by colon and backslash. Using absolute paths, we can describe the location of the selfie.jpg file or the labs directory. We can also describe locations using relative paths. Suppose our current working directory is c:\users\jane\docs. The labs directory is simply described as labs. The lab2 file is described as labs\lab2.xlsx. If we wanted to navigate up the directory tree, we would use 2 dots. So if we were in our current working directory and wanted to describe the location of the selfie.jpg file, we would write 2 dots. That represents the Jane directory, then the pics subdirectory, followed by the selfie.jpg file name. Remember, the 2 dots navigate up the directory tree. Essentially, it represents the parent directory. For most computer users, the Graphical User Interface, or GUI, is the most intuitive way to interact with an operating system. But sometimes, typing commands can be more efficient. This is especially true when operating on multiple files or issuing repetitive commands. The program used to type commands to the OS is called the command line or terminal. Here in Windows, there are multiple ways you can open up the command line. You can shift-click and select Open Command Window here. Or you could open the Windows menu and start typing CMD. That's the program that represents the command line. Press Enter or click on Command Prompt. Here, we can type commands to navigate the file system. I'm going to type dir to list the contents of this directory. I can change the current working directory using the change directory or cd command. Notice that the current working directory is listed in my prompt. Here I see the absolute path, starting at the root directory. The drive letter, followed by a colon, backslash, users, Stephen C, documents. The greater than symbol here indicates that this is a prompt. Any commands that I issue will be relative to this location. We can see here the 2 files that I have in this directory and the subdirectory labs. There are also entries for the parent directory, which is the 2 dots, and the current directory, which is the single dot. In the labs subdirectory, we see the 2 files that I have. Now I've navigated down the directory tree. Let me navigate up. I'm going to change directory, cd, to the parent directory, ... Notice how the prompt changed. It always reflects the current working directory. If I want to, I can navigate directly to the pictures directory. I'm going to cd, 2 dots to represent the parent directory, backslash, pictures, enter. If I wanted to, I could open a file from the command line as well. In Windows, I do that by using the start command. When I run this command, the operating system will note the file extension and open the appropriate application. To exit the command line, I simply type exit. In macOS, the terminal is located under Applications and Utilities. By default, the current working directory is your home directory. To list its contents, we can type ls and add -l for extra information. Here, we see a listing of all the directories, the permissions, the owner and group, the size and date of modification, and the names. We can change the current working directory by using the change directory or cd command, just as we did with Windows. The current working directory is indicated in the title of the window and at the beginning of the prompt. If you want the full path of the working directory, use the print working directory command, or pwd. Again, we can list its contents, and here we see our two files and our directory. Using the cd command, we can navigate to the parent directory, or we could use it to navigate to a different branch of the directory tree. In macOS, the directory names are separated by /, whereas with Windows, they were separated by backslashes. We can also open files from the command line using the open command. The operating system will use the file extension or the creation code to determine which application should open the file. Next, we'll take a look at the Linux operating system. You might notice a lot of similarities between its terminal and the macOS terminal. This is because they're both based on the same family of operating systems. To issue textual commands in Linux, we use the terminal. Again, it can sometimes be found on the desktop or in the application menu. Again, the default working directory is the user's home directory. This is indicated in Linux with a tilde character. We can list the contents of the directory using the ls command, and for additional information, we include the -l option. Here we see information about all the contents of this directory: the permissions, the user, the group, the size, and date of modification, and the names. As with other operating systems, if I want to change the working directory, I use the cd command. Notice how the title of the window changes to reflect the current working directory. This path is relative to the user's home directory. If I want the full path, I can use the command print working directory, or pwd, and then press enter. Here we see the full path: the / home, Stephen C, documents. Again, we can view the contents of this directory. We can also descend into subdirectories and back into parent directories. With the command line, we can also navigate to other branches of the directory tree. CD, parent directory, pictures, in the next video, we'll cover more about files and file systems. Thanks for watching.